Welcome to the Into AI Safety podcast, where we discuss the challenges facing the field of AI safety and those who work within it. This show aims to provide the foundation and resources needed to get up to speed on safe and ethical AI. As always, I am your host, Jacob Hames. During the podcast, you may hear this sound, which denotes that I have included at least one link related to the content that preceded the sound. The purpose of this is to allow for citations and providing resources without breaking the flow of conversations. As per usual, items mentioned during asides will have links in the show notes as well. This interview was recorded on July 16th, 2025, and asides were recorded on July 27th, 2025. Alright, so I met today's guest when they reached out to me in the Apart channel for the Western US region, and it turned out that he lives a little over an hour away from me in Fort Collins. He has his own business, Red Mage Creative, which specifically works with groups, especially nonprofits, to help them navigate the tech space, especially when it comes to AI. He's also the organizer of the Fort Collins chapter of the Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group, which just recently announced its nonprofit status. In our conversation, we'll discuss the current state of the tech job market, how 3 layoffs in quick succession impacted him, dark patterns in AI, building inclusive community, and so much more. With that, I'm excited to introduce Andres Sepulveda Morales.
Yeah, of course. I am Andres Sepulveda Morales, and I go by he, they pronouns.
Awesome. So, just to start this off right, in one sentence, what do you do now, and why does it matter?
So what I do is I build community through tech, through my involvement with the Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group. And then I also support impact makers and barrier breakers in navigating tech challenges through my own business, Red Mage.
Awesome. So how did you get there? What path did you take to be involved in Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group and also starting your own business, Red Mage?
I think we can start with Rocky Mountain AI because that one's a little bit more of a simpler journey.
Okay.
For me, I got involved with a lot of AI safety like hackathons through an organization we're both familiar with, Apart Research. Mm-hmm. I did maybe like 4 or 5 projects. I got invited to speak at an event in Denver for a group called the Brainwave Collective. Shout out Daniel Ritchie. Whoever, if he's listening, fantastic guy. He runs that group out of Denver. Yeah, it was talking about a project with the Concordia framework specifically. And we had gotten talking with a number of RMAIIG people involved. One of the leaders of the Denver group, as well as members of the student board were there. We got to talking. I basically said, hey, I'm in Fort Collins and I'm really passionate about how this technology affects people. And they introduced me to Dan Murray. Also, shout out to Dan Murray. He's fantastic. He's the one that started the whole Rocky Mountain AI thing 2 years ago. And next thing you know, I was having a basic small little meetup in a crowded, loud as hell bar in Fort Collins.
Nice.
And since then, it's grown a lot. We have about 300 something registered members here in Fort Collins, and we regularly have anywhere from 40 to 60 people at each meetup.
That's awesome.
There's been a lot of exciting engagement from the community. People really seem like they're itching to talk about this stuff in Fort Collins. And it's been really motivating to be able to support people in navigating this, regardless of whether or not they actually use the technology daily. Just being able to navigate that technology with them and share different perspectives on that is incredibly rewarding.
Nice. Okay. And then I guess going back towards Red Mage and sort of how you got there, maybe starting with your background. So how did you learn about this stuff in the first place, and sort of how did you build up those abilities?
Yeah. So I have about 8 years of experience in software engineering. I started kind of in college, like as a web publisher for my university. And, I've interned at the National Reconnaissance Office. I started doing full stack development in Fort Collins with a company. And really with that, I started to experience kind of this carousel of layoffs, basically.
Okay.
Like regardless of whether or not I wanted to or not, these companies kind of tended to lay me off over and over again. Basically, over the span of the past 2 years, I've been laid off 3 times. And with that, I found that the one thing that kind of stuck through all of those layoffs has been namely the community support, like going and getting involved with other community groups, other meetups in town, kind of getting into more topics that I'm passionate about, which that's a whole nother rabbit hole. I like to consider myself a multi-passionate. I have so many different interests and exciting things that I like to get involved with, whether it's tech, whether it is cross-stitching, all these different topics. Basically, that was the through line throughout all of that. And with my own experience, it became like, well, I'm really passionate about these topics and I really want to support these people. At the same time, I have these tech skills where I can go and make websites, I can go and automate things, integrate things together, help people learn how this technology works. And it just kind of culminated into what I am kind of navigating now through Red Mage, where I am supporting the people that I would really like to support in a way that I also have a lot of experience in. And it really helped.
That definitely makes sense. I guess I want to jump back just a little bit and focus on the layoffs and the job market, because I know that a lot of the tech world currently is facing, like within the past 2 years or so, facing lots of layoffs and just a really bad job market compared to what it was a little further back. And so understanding this and digging into like your experience, I think is valuable, if potentially to share some of your advice, but then also just to validate that like this is something that's happened and that is happening to many people. So maybe you can start with like, why do you think you were let go, or what is it that caused these sorts of shifts?
I think a lot of it boils down to like cost saving maneuvers on the part of the company. Especially with my first layoff, they were recently acquired by private equity. So their full goal, as soon as they went in, was to kind of make the company as profitable as possible and cut costs wherever possible. For my development team, I was there for about a year and a half, and the rest of the people on the team were there for anywhere for like 6 to 8 years. So in terms of the weakest link relative to projects, it kind of makes sense that it's like, well, we don't really need this extra developer here if these 3 developers are here doing the feature work.
Sure.
And that trend kind of carries over to a lot of my other layoffs. I will say, in the context of like my third layoff, that was more of like a startup scenario. Like that's kind of like what you sign up for a little bit. You have these startups that are kind of volatile. They're trying to innovate in their spaces, and all of a sudden things don't necessarily, plans change, and all of a sudden a role that is vital and you're a rock star in that role all of a sudden is redundant. So for me, it's been kind of like a constant battle between, I feel like I have a lot of skills, I have a lot of things that I can bring to the table, and then also, well, then why did nobody want to hire me? It creates this kind of weird dichotomy in your head where you're just like, well, am I worth it? Am I worth anything? Like, this is awesome and also terrifying and frustrating, and they're better, like I'm better off without this job, but I'm still hungry. Like, all these kind of weird thoughts kind of start to formulate in your head.
So I mean, and that gets into it a little bit, but like, how did, the first layoff, it happens, and based on what you're saying, it's, you are the most junior developer in a team that's, been around for a lot longer than you. And it was an acquisition by private equity. They're sort of known for coming in and quote unquote trimming the fat, which really just means stripping away everything they can to make it as profitable as possible, regardless of how long it lasts. And then into the second and third, at subsequent times, how is that impacting your like mental health and how you're feeling about these things? I thought it would be a good idea to give some context as to what's happening in the tech job market. Some people may already know all this because they've lived it, but others, I think it's worth having the extra context. It's worth noting that this is going to have a US-centric perspective, partially because I'm from the US, but also partially because that's what majority of the media covers. In the future, I think it would be neat to go into this more in depth, but we'll save that for a later episode. It used to be that recent college graduates had an employment rate higher than the national average. The difference between the recent grad and national employment rates is called the new grad gap. In general, we want this number to be high, as it means that recent college graduates are able to secure jobs relatively easily. Their education was valuable, and they are quickly contributing to the workforce. It's also associated with other good economic things and long-term stuff. That gets more into economics than we care about here, though. This value dropped significantly around 2013, followed by a steady rate of decline to present day. Importantly, this value became negative, meaning the new grads were being employed at a lower rate than the national average, starting around 2019. Now, this is just general context, but we'll come back to it in a minute. Separately, in the tech job space, when things shut down in 2020 due to COVID, big tech companies found themselves in a new world where everything had to be remote first, and as a result, they hired immensely. Amazon nearly doubled in size, Meta more than doubled in size, and people in tech experienced an incredibly favorable job market. In 2022, when in-person interaction ramped up again, it became clear that tech had overhired and overpromised. But rather than admit to this, or even market their blunder as some sort of strategic hedging, most companies decided to scapegoat the new kid on the block and cited preparation for AI infrastructure as a key motivator, doing so to save face with Wall Street and other investors. Of course, the data doesn't really back this up, because the downward trend started before AI came onto the scene with the announcement of ChatGPT. Despite this, tech companies have continued to cite AI as a major influence in their recent layoffs, which have been quite significant. However, it's worth addressing the merit of this claim in the first place. A recent study conducted by Meter shows that the use of AI systems by open source software developers actually reduces productivity, massively undercutting the claims of big tech and other AI boosters that AI workflows make them meaningfully more productive across all sorts of different tasks. Although they're claiming that these systems are incredibly useful, some going as far as to say that all coding work, or 95+% of it, will be conducted by AI systems, they're also claiming that this won't significantly disrupt the job market. It will just shift things around. In parallel to all of this rhetoric around AI taking jobs, the pool of potential applicants has significantly increased due to considerations such as the mass layoffs of qualified individuals, which are continuing to this day, and improved performance of tech workers based in developing countries. As a result, companies have become more aggressive when attempting to find so-called top talent. So, it isn't uncommon to go through 5 or 6 interview stages, many of which can include time-intensive work tests and significant preparation. And at the end of this all, once you've done 4 or 5 interviews, you could still just get ghosted by the company. And it may not even be because someone else got the job. Companies are increasingly okay with posting ghost jobs, that is, positions which don't actually exist and are never meant to be filled, or at least not within the near future when the job is posted. This is done for a number of reasons, mostly centered around stocking up on potential applicants for future real recruitment initiatives, and impressing investors or other stakeholders with good hiring activity, despite not actually delivering on it. It's no wonder that job hunting stints lasting at least 5 months is essentially the status quo. All of this put together results in a pretty abysmal state of things for someone who is just out of school or has recently been laid off.
The first time it feels like it, you know, you're very much on the high horse of like, well, you know, they don't know what they've lost. Mm-hmm. You have this feeling of like, well, they made a mistake, you know, they're going to see the results of their mistake eventually at some point. Like, sure. You have this feeling of like, well, you know, things happen for a reason, so I'm just going to move on to bigger, better.
Yeah.
At the second and third layoffs, it really starts to feel like, well, when is that bigger, better thing going to happen? Like, you know, like you end up in this situation where now all of a sudden you are no longer seeing the benefits of like being in this new job, being in this new environment. And all it feels like is you're just kind of being pinballed around to the next job. Yeah. And your finances take us like suffer for it, like fully, like, because then in those interim periods while you're trying to find work, you're not really making income. You might have unemployment, but even then that has a limit as well. So then you're just kind of in this position of like, well, I have a timer here. Am I going to find another job? Am I going to find something that's going to help me sustain myself? And the worst part about it is really just you feel like none of this is your fault, right? Like you're just kind of like, okay, well, I'm in this situation. I don't know what to do. And, you know, it's not like like a lot of people, like the people who are being laid off throughout the tech industry right now, they're good people who do good work. Like, yeah. And it's not, it's really easy to go and internalize that feeling of worthlessness because a company has gone and laid you off, when in all reality, that's not the case. It's largely cost-saving maneuvers that just end up making you feel like all of a sudden, like your worth in the context of your career, whatever that means at this point, is somewhat like fragile, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And then at the end of all this, so at the end of the third layoff, you decided to not like pursue applying for jobs as strongly as the first two times, and instead spin up Red Mage Creative. So one thing that I'm interested in is understanding your thought process and your journey to sort of get to that conclusion of, I'm gonna just do my own thing and I'm going to define it. What was it that caused that sort of shift for you?
The shift was somewhat twofold in terms of wanting to start Red Mage. On one hand, I already kind of had the idea of Red Mage around 2023. Mm-hmm. It was originally the idea of having a collective of creative professionals being able to support and then have, you know, like graphic designers, artists, marketers, web designers, all collectively working like without the need of like a full-time job. When you only have one person in that collective, it ends up being really hard to be a collective.
I get that. I definitely get that.
It just ended up being like, well, I was really passionate about starting that and kind of decoupling myself from having an individual full-time job. But it wasn't until like the third layoff where I was realizing I was kind of going insane, going through the motions and going through with recruiters and interviews, like with jobs that either paid way too little or they were just completely out of value alignment. Like I got reached out to by a company that's being ran by like the Wolf of Wall Street for like AI. And I'm like, cool, that's really interesting or exciting, or it might make me money, but it isn't necessarily value aligned with where I want to be.
The Wolf of Wall Street for AI, isn't that like most AI?
Yeah, I don't know how much I can speak on that, but there's some hiring process happening somewhere regarding that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just ended up being like, it was constantly either a values alignment or a monetary alignment. And meanwhile, people were going and asking me like, hey, Do you do websites? Can you help me connect my MailChimp to my HubSpot? Can you go and do these things for us? Like, we don't necessarily have the budget to keep an engineer on full time, but we really like you to help us out with stuff.
Yeah.
And so that started kind of formulating the thought of like, well, maybe I should actually get my ass in gear and start doing this as a business.
Yeah. I mean, just related to that, when I was working in IT, like healthcare IT, a big thing that we experienced was like the spin up time could be really extensive. But then once you've got it working, ideally, like, you don't have to do much and you can move on to some other project that you're helping with. And so that really makes sense from the business perspective of, you know, smaller organizations or nonprofits that are saying, you know, we don't have a lot of money. We can't just hire an engineer, but we have this one project that we know we need to get done, and we can't do it ourselves efficiently with our capacity. So I think that, yeah, really makes sense and resonates with me in terms of what smaller organizations that are not tech savvy need.
Because then it was the same thing in the beverage industry as well with the software company that I was working at. A lot of brewers that were using the software, they didn't have the budget for having a full-time expert on how to use this software. They would just use like this, like, we had a whole professional services department that would specifically help with those like one-time projects to connect whatever system readings that they needed to have with our software, or whatever the case may be. I did one in Canada that was about the same, where we had to connect with their the like liquor boards like systems, but all of that, it was a very antiquated format. They would send it in like basically PDFs.
Yeah,
and it's like, once you figure it out,
whenever you're working with government, it's like, all right, time to go back 20 years in terms of technology. So
I reached out to a board once, and they told me that like a CSV export was too advanced for their current system. So I feel you.
As a last note on the layoff portion, I guess I think it's worth taking a second to say, like, what advice would you give to other people? Let's say they've recently gone through layoffs, or maybe they haven't even done layoffs or been laid off yet, but are just out of college and are trying to find positions in this sort of space. Do you have any advice for them? And do you think there's anything that was particularly valuable that you did, or decisions that you made during this process?
100%. I would say the biggest piece of advice I can give is to build. And what I mean by that is like build some sort of stability into your processes that is completely decoupled from the work that you do.
So when I hear build, I think like start working on projects that are independent from other sources so that you can have something that's like in a portfolio to share. But it sounds like that isn't necessarily what you're saying.
So yes, and
okay.
in this scenario, because for me, when I think of build, I fully think of like, hey, I can build applications, I can build websites, I can build the PC that I'm doing this podcast on.
Sure.
Like those are examples of building, but I think that going and approaching it from only a tech perspective is somewhat exclusionary from my perspective.
Sure.
Like just to be mindful of all the wonderful people in my life that do not know how to use digital technology in any capacity. It really, building can be through community, like building community, either making your own like group or whatever the case may be around something that you're passionate about, or supporting somebody else who is. Like both of that is building community and building resiliency, which I think is the biggest part of it.
Okay.
Where with these projects that you're building resiliency and like figuring out that you yourself are capable and able to like navigate whatever like topic you're trying to do. Like, for example, with me and Apart Research, it was very much like, I'm passionate about AI safety. I'm passionate about how this technology affects people. I can go and just like get involved with this and build something awesome myself. I didn't have to go and get a full-time job to do that. Similarly with the meetups in Fort Collins and things like that, it was the same deal where I can go and build this community, or I can go and support other people who are building communities, not necessarily in AI, but still in community. Yeah. Right. And I think that ultimately leads to building that resiliency, because then you are not alone in that struggle. You have people that you can relate to and that you're actually socializing with, and people see the value that you yourself intrinsically carry, as opposed to just being kind of locked up in your room for 8 hours being like, well, let me apply to 20 jobs, let me tailor my resume, let me go and do all these things. Like, the more I felt like I was decoupling my identity from my work, the better I felt.
Okay.
Really. Where instead of being like, oh, well, you know, like my identity was being this software engineer at this company. Now it's like, well, I'm a technologist and it doesn't matter what company I'm particularly a part of at this time. I'm passionate about this technology regardless.
Absolutely.
And that's been extremely helpful for me.
And so you mentioned a part, which is AI safety organization, and, you know, talked about that a little bit. I mean, this podcast is also just called Into AI Safety. So I feel like I should ask, why AI specifically for you? What about AI was enticing or important enough to sort of be your initial focus there?
Yeah, of course. I have always been passionate about how the tech that I build or whatever application I make affects the people that are using it. Like I got along like a house fire a lot of times with a lot of the UI and UX user interface, user experience professionals in my software engineering jobs, because I would actually take what the research and all the information that they're giving me seriously. And I would be like, hey, you gave me this whole guide so I don't have to think about this. This is great. Like, you did the research on what works for our clients, so I'm just going to implement. And I would get into pretty deep conversations with them about, like, you know, where should I head with this application? What makes sense? AI felt like an extension of that kind of curiosity into how tech affects people.
Okay.
For me, I found that there was a lot of conversation about business and there was a lot of conversation about engineering, where it's like, well, what ROI can we get out of AI? What kind of, you know, engineering efficiency can we get? Can we write more lines of code, since that's a worthwhile metric to pursue?
How can number go up?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I'm a big fan of idle games, and I understand fully that there's an excitement when you see that number go up.
Go up. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's still very much like there's so much more to the conversation. Like, for every conversation that we're having about how can you streamline your business processes with AI, there's somebody concerned about, like, okay, well, what happens if my kid gets online and gets kind of like catfished or scammed by some sort of AI like thing, right?
Or more realistically, your parents, because let's be real, that's where it's going to happen.
Yes. So for me, with that conversation about AI, would like those types of conversations from lesser known perspectives really interested me, and I started looking into, well, how can I get involved with it? And, you know, I started jumping around. At some point, I got on the 80,000 hours website or whatever the case may be, where they have a lot of those types of roles posted. And that's how I got kind of involved with stuff like apart research, and just like checking out that not everybody that's in AI is just talking about how companies can profit from this. There's a lot more to the conversation. There's a lot more perspectives, and, you know, there's plenty of runway for so many different people to tackle it from different perspectives.
boy, do I have some things to say about 80,000 hours, but I think that it deserves its own highlights somewhere down the line. For now, I guess I'll just say that the job board on the 80,000 hours website is pretty solid. However, there are some major problems with the career trajectory / field building funnel they have built. In my opinion, their pipeline has significant negative impacts on the mental health of many people, as well as their career prospects in some cases, due to their emphasis on certain narratives, almost exclusive promotion of in-group resources, and providing boilerplate recommendations to people with widely varied backgrounds and experiences. I've worked with many individuals who felt that they couldn't help address the problems they care about, despite being in a great position to do so, because of 80,000 hours. So, do use their resources, but also evaluate things independently. Yeah, I think that one's huge, is because I don't even think that's necessarily focused on within AI safety, that there are so many different directions that you can come at this problem from. And so, yeah, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I'm sure. I do want to concretely understand as well, like, what is Red Mage Creative? What are you trying to do with the business, and what are you doing? Just first give us an idea of what that is.
Yeah, so Red Mage is my attempt of trying to create that sort of resiliency and foundation for myself through what I like to call demystifying technology for people.
Okay.
Concretely, that turns into supporting them in navigating websites, web applications, automation, implementation. So like if they're trying to figure out like, hey, do we need to start thinking about a CRM? Do we need to start thinking about like, having some sort of system in place to handle this process because it's starting to feel like a bottleneck and we might need some tech involved in this. And then from there, also training on those tools, namely the big like question is AI in a lot of these spaces. Both like there's a sort of both fear and curiosity associated with it. So it's been really interesting to navigate that.
So when you tie this to AI, it's mainly that the hot topic right now is AI. And so people want to know, how do I implement these tools? And that's where you come in.
Right. Especially from the perspective of someone who's deeply passionate about nonprofits and the barriers they're trying to break. Like having somebody who is deeply passionate about that and be able to then talk about the tech. I find that that's really resonates with a lot of people. I think with tech, there's kind of this like tech bro aesthetic associated with it, where there's a certain stereotype of who's involved with tech, and that kind of makes it feel like, well, this isn't for me because I don't fall into that demographic. I don't make that much money. I don't look like these people. I'm not involved with trying to disrupt this market with the next biggest B2B SaaS. Like, which, if you don't know what that means, that doesn't matter in this context. But it just ends up being like when you have someone that actually looks like you, sounds like you, and is able to go and communicate and understand how you feel about these things, regardless of whatever intersectionalities you identify with, it ends up creating an environment where people feel actually included in the tech conversation. If that all makes sense.
And so you mentioned nonprofits, but it's also like the barrier breakers. So it's not just nonprofits. But obviously that's probably primarily your focus with Red Mage Creative. So what is the biggest misconception or misunderstanding that your clients have about AI? What is it that they're confused about, or maybe they don't even know that they're confused about?
I find that the biggest thing that they're really confused about is that these generative AI tools, and I say generative AI specifically, just because like for me, I am not a data science professional. So do not ask me to go and create a regression model. Do not ask me to go and set up some sort of training on CUDA with your GPU. That's not necessarily my forte. What tends to happen is that these AI tools start to feel like this mystical, unattainable thing. Like it's overly complex. Like the way that you use this, like you have to suddenly learn how to speak new, like kind of like how people started learning how to speak to Google and being really good at Googling. As an IT professional, I'm sure you understand that one pretty well.
Yeah.
But it just ends up feeling like they're overcomplicating it in their head, when in all reality, a lot of these tools, like when it comes to language and natural language, they work best when you talk to them in natural language. Like obviously there's structure involved with some of these prompts, but a lot of people tend to get into the weeds and start overcomplicating it in their head, and they start thinking that like, you know, oh well, we can't use AI because it's too complicated or it's too expensive or it's too, you know, whatever the case may be. They think it's this big, like crazy AI thing they have to like overcome, when in all reality it's a tool. In a lot of ways, although the tool itself has its own quirks and issues, it is not as insanely complex as people make it out to be. At least from the use case perspective of like somebody who is not trying to create a tool like that.
Yeah. So I really like the framing of AI systems as tools, because I think it necessarily narrows down the scope of what you're intending to use the system for, and sort of the scope explosion of the idea of general purpose LLMs is part of the problem and part of a significant part of my concern with regards to safety. So when you are promoting this sort of tool-oriented, tool perspective of AI, how do you help determine like if AI is the right tool, or impart that sort of intuition onto the people that you're working with?
You touched on a very important part there. If it is a tool that is worth using in a particular context or scenario. I had like at a previous employer, when I was just starting out with getting involved with the Rocky Mountain AI, it was very much like they were like, well, we need to catch up on the AI train. So we need to go and start implementing AI in our organization, start finding places to go and implement AI. And like building
and
a strategy.
Of course, the Microsoft executives came at that point.
Yes. It was kind of like from the perspective of like, okay, well, we need to put AI into something, like, and it's just like, writing a strategy for that is really hard, because then it's just like you're basically listing everything the company does and trying to see whether or not you could do something with AI, which you could, right? Like with a generative AI, like you could set up some automation with like N8N or something and have it do some amount of like customer service responses, for example. Like, but then it just feels like you're very much rushing into it from the wrong perspective. I like to see a lot of use of technology tools very similarly to like working on a PC or working on your house or working on a car, where not every tool is going to be immediately or the best suited for that job. If you walk into the house and you're just looking for a nail to hit, you might find a nail to hit, and that's great. But if your issue is that you have a leaky pipe, hitting it with the hammer doesn't necessarily help.
Yeah.
You know, if anything, like you risk creating more issues that way. And I find that AI
what
is
if the hammer's got like a really cool extra feature on it?
Well, I mean, it depends on how many like model like suffixes you add to it. If it's a Hammer
okay.
4.0 Mini, then it's probably fine. But if
know.
it's just a hammer, like maybe not. But
awesome.
yeah,
No, that's
it just ends up it just ends up feeling like when you approach it from the solution rather than the problem, AI tends to not work nearly as well. I think the Product Management Institute quoted like 70 to 80% of AI projects they polled failed.
Yeah.
And it was due to that exact type of reasoning, stuff that we have largely understood pretty well in the context of project and product management, where it's like, well, what problem are we trying to solve? Do the users actually want this tool or feature?
In product design, that's essentially the entire question, right?
Mm-hmm.
You spend I spent essentially a entire course in my master's degree, which was called product design, which was essentially just reinforcing the idea of like, understand the need that you are addressing, and just saying that in tons of different ways, and ways to help assess that and get better and closer towards it. But if you don't understand that need thoroughly, then you're not going to create a solution that's actually effective.
Oh, 100%. And like going back to the Hammer 4.0 mini example, like it just ends up feeling like, okay, well, yeah, if there's nothing in the house to fix with the Hammer 4.0 mini, then why are you going to use it? Like it doesn't make sense. What people like to go and tackle as an AI problem really often is like a process problem. Like maybe you're not keeping track of stuff enough. Maybe you're not like establishing the process of how you are handling invoices, as an example, enough. Like maybe you are not putting in the due diligence to make sure that this whatever data is going in is sanitized enough for AI to be consistent with. It just ends up feeling like we're approaching it kind of backwards. And when you flip that and you're like, okay, well, let's approach it from if AI can help, not necessarily how, that helps a lot with approaching it and feeling and building trust, because you're not just trying to bolt on some new solution for somebody, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I want to mention, just because, I mean, a couple minutes ago you mentioned 80,000 hours. Something that I have found, which is particularly prevalent in the AI safety space, is tech anxiety. And I think that's true also just in general. And you mentioned tech anxiety in some of your like promotional material as well. So I guess before I make a fool of myself and say, here's what I think it is, and you're like, no, that's not at all what I mean. What do you think tech anxiety is?
I think tech anxiety can take a lot of forms. An example that I can give is one of my clients who I love her to death. She's a nonprofit around supporting people with systemic barriers in the job search. So specifically, she prioritizes people with neurodivergencies, disabilities, and potential like unhoused individuals.
Okay.
So she specializes with those people. And when we started working together on AI training, she was very much like, okay, well, I have a lot of concerns about how this fits into my company, how it fits into what I'm doing, how it fits into the authenticity that I bring to my clients and the work that I bring to them. And, you know, we had to go and get over those hurdles and talk about like, okay, well, you know,
so what do you mean exactly by that authenticity, if you don't mind sharing? Just like she felt that she was compromising her morality by using AI systems?
Yeah, specifically for her case, she had experienced kind of people getting over reliant on AI in her own life, like with the people that she was taking care of and supporting through their job search. They would go and basically start overly relying on AI to basically do whatever they needed that was any amount of work. Because they're already stressed out. They're already really frustrated with the way they're like everything was going on. So there was an opportunity to kind of get things done, like whether it's like resume building, emails, messages, whatever the case may be. That over reliance had created kind of a perception in her head that this stuff was inherently harmful.
Okay.
And that it didn't fit the use case of her business, namely because she didn't want to start creating this environment where she just had a whole bunch of people just completely like reliant or otherwise addicted to AI.
Gotcha. Okay. That
And
makes sense.
for her, that ended up culminating our first meeting where I started teaching her how we were using Duck AI specifically, but it hooks into a lot of the popular models. And she was absolutely frozen and unable to really touch the keyboard. Like, she didn't want to touch it. She didn't want to deal with and like even start prompting it. She was just like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to touch this. And
So how do you deal with that?
we had to work through it a lot. And I think coming at it from a perspective of empathy and building is critical. Just because like this person is having this experience that may or may not make sense to you does not mean that those emotions and you know what's going on in this person's head is not valid.
Right.
You know, like those emotions are still there. You can go and come at it with whatever logic you want, but those emotions are still there. And like it ended up being a very long conversation about, well, what are your fears regarding this? Like, what are your concerns and what can I help navigate with this? Like, not from a perspective of like, you know, going and trying to like fact check and be like, actually, it's really not that bad. Actually, the environmental issues associated with this are not that bad. You should just use it and not think about it. Like, holding space for that, those emotions that people are feeling is like that part of the empathy that I was talking about. And that starts to build the trust of being able to actually get them to type and prompt on the keyboard. It took like maybe like 40 minutes of discussion. And after the fact, I found out that part of her concern was that she fully thought that AI was somebody behind the screen. Which, you know, if you look at Builder's AI or whatever the case may be, maybe it's sort of not a crazy fear. But she thought that it was kind of like somebody trying to take advantage of her through these AI tools. And that she was opening herself up to be taken advantage of by using these tools, because someone can just go and be like, hey, you know, the best way in order for you to create a marketing plan for your nonprofit is to send me like $250 in Google Play gift cards.
Right.
Which, you know.
So I, you know, on first glance, I guess this scenario I think sounds like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. But I think that fear, which you mentioned, is really real. These systems are being created to serve a bottom line, and as a result, they are created to maximize profits. Like that is what they are for. And so oftentimes that sort of perverse incentive can cause some really not okay sorts of occurrences in how the chatbot is presented to users, or the kind of outputs that it creates. But there's work on this in UI and UX, so user interface, user experience. It's called dark patterns, I think, and there's starting to be some more research on that in AI as well. In addition to being the response you might get from a 13-year-old edgelord when you ask them about their disturbing drawings, dark patterns are relatively new phenomena where businesses use manipulative tactics to trick a user into taking actions they wouldn't otherwise. The term was coined in 2010 by Harry Brignall, who pointed out various motifs seen in user interface design. Since then, academic interest has grown massively, and the term has expanded beyond the UI and UX domains. Some common examples include the "Buy it while it lasts" banner, which shows a countdown clock and a number of items left in stock, even though both of these numbers are usually arbitrary. Or confirm shaming, with pop-ups whose options are things like allow or no, I prefer to bleed to death, which is a real example, by the way. These deceptive design patterns really do make a difference. One study in 2021 showed that users were over 2 times more likely to buy a product when subjected to mild dark patterns, and almost 4 times as likely when aggressive dark patterns were used. However, the presence of dark patterns also left a sour taste in the mouths of users, which is likely to result in the platform losing users in the long term. We also see deceptive design patterns appearing in and around AI tools. The chatbot interface itself can be considered a deceptive design pattern, because the interface mimics that of a text chat between real people, anthropomorphizing the system and lending more credibility to its outputs. Textual outputs from language models have also been shown to exhibit dark patterns. Many models have strong brand bias towards the developer that has trained them, and sycophancy, when a model attempts to appeal to the user by answering in a manner that reflects what they likely want to believe, is essentially necessary for the systems to work as chatbots at all. The grossest ones are AI companions. For these companies, there are direct monetary incentives for keeping a user on their platform for as long as possible, regardless of the impact that this might have on that person. With attempts to sway popular opinion already being conducted at scale, I'm looking at you, Mecha Hitler Grok, it's incredibly important to understand what dark patterns are and how to spot them in the wild. So check out the links in the show notes to get yourself up to speed. But this idea of like promoting something that the user wouldn't necessarily want. So for the UI UX one, or case rather, that is having one of those ads that has the X that's really tiny and faded in the top right corner and a big X in the center. And so if you press the big X, it actually clicks on the ad. That's an example of a dark pattern, because it's sort of hijacking what your perception is, and sort of how things have been set up in the past, and norms that exist in order to promote you clicking the ad, which gives them money. Similarly, if you can promote someone, a given user, to continue chatting with a chatbot, that's just good business. Because every time they interact with it, you get money. And so I think that's like a reasonable concern and something to be cognizant of, is being skeptical of these systems and not necessarily trusting or taking at face value the outputs or how they're engaging with you. But at the same time, being willing to start thinking about, how can I use this system effectively?
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. I find that there is a real gap between the perception of how excited and amazed people are at AI technology and the reality of people having emotions that are not celebratory about AI in so many different waves. Like I wouldn't even call it like a spectrum. It's like a multi-pattern gradient of like, just like all these different emotions coagulating together. I was just going to say the example of that, we had a recent event in Rocky Mountain AI. I ran one for AI in the creative arts, where obviously very divisive topic. We had over like 22 submissions, and it was like about 170 people going to CU Boulder in order to hear people talk about the topic.
Just go Buffs.
Yes. Well, I mean, I went to NAU, so I don't have any stake in the game either way, but CU Boulder is amazing to us. So
go Buffs.
Go Buffs for the purposes of an impartial lumberjack.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so what was really interesting about that was that we kind of got submissions from the community about what AI and creativity mean for them. Like it, do not like it, what are your thoughts on that? We had offered a small monetary prize thanks to our sponsors, and out of all the people that went and generated movies, generated images, did all these things, the people that won were largely using things that were not AI assisted. So like the first and second place, the first and second place like submissions, one was this big kind of like painting on the four horsemen of the AI apocalypse with a lot of subtlety and like imagery of all these different things. The second place was a poem around kind of in the same mindset, where it was kind of talking about how all of a sudden now like EM dashes or M dashes or whatever are now like a sign of the beast, and you can't use M dashes because like it's AI generated, when it's like, hey, I have a degree in English, I can use this tool because it is like a tool in English to use.
Yeah. That one's okay. Just as a quick sidebar, that one's pissed me off because I use EM dashes like frequently. So the reason, at least, I guess I don't have a confirmed study on this, but what I would posit is that because language models are trained extensively on academic writing, they began to use EM dashes, which are frequently used in academic writing, meaning that writing that I do, which has EM dashes and has sort of become part of how I write, is now seen as, oh, well, if you use that, I'll assume that you are writing with AI. One nice thing, and maybe I shouldn't say this because then more people will start doing it and then it'll be ruined, but usually the way LLMs use the EM dash is something you can switch out directly for a semicolon. That's not true for EM dashes always, but in many cases where LLMs use it, it is. So, yeah. I also already use semicolons, so I guess.
Yeah, for me, I don't use a lot of those tools. So for me, I end up being like, well, yeah, I don't think any of my blog posts really have like EM dashes in them, because I'm just like, I don't use them. I did my my time in academia, and I like writing, although I'm very passionate about writing with kind of more advanced punctuation and things like that has never been a strong suit of mine. All of that to say, in the context of the AI in the creative arts event, we even had a submission from somebody who's very prominent in the AI like space here in Colorado, who it was very critical about what how AI is being implemented in creative spaces. But they wanted to stay anonymous because they were fearful of what, like, the perception of somebody, basically, right? Like, like being like, oh, I don't know the perception of how AI, you know, me being prominent in the AI field and then going in and saying something critical about AI might be. And it's like, well, no, I would argue quite the opposite. Like,
well, I think most people would argue the opposite, but if you argue from the perspective of maybe an employer, let's say you're an employer that's an AI booster, you don't want to hire someone who in their free time is undercutting what you're saying. So like I do get that to some extent. I think that's very unfortunate and would like to see more people still be able to come out in support of what they truly believe, because I think that's really, really powerful and part of the reason that we see this disconnect between how things are displayed to the public in terms of like, oh, everyone thinks AI is super cool, but then when you actually talk to people, most people aren't convinced. Most people are much more skeptical, and are much more level-headed than what you see in the sort of news and other promotional material.
1000%. It is like with all of that, it creates this exact perception that you're talking about, where there's a gap between the people who, like, you know, people are going and saying, well, you know, AI is really cool and all that stuff. And like you have webinars, you have events all talking about the amazing things AIs can do. And then when you talk to individual people, they're like, well, you know, I'm kind of concerned about this. I'm kind of concerned about the environmental impacts, whether that's energy, CO2, water, or even precious metals, which whole nother rabbit hole.
Yeah.
like it is the same thing where it just feels like people don't want to, like, they feel like they're going to be retaliated against if they talk about AI in a way that's critical, when I fully believe that, like, if you didn't care about AI and how it affected you, you would just not say anything. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, really, the enemy of, I think the quote is like, the enemy of love is not hate, it's apathy. It's very similar in AI, where it's like, I would trust someone who's willing to tell me, hey, there's something wrong, as opposed to someone who's just like, no, everything's good, everything's fantastic, we're good to go, ship it. Like, the more that people put that energy into things that they care about, from my perspective at least. So I find that a lot of times with AI, like, to your point, I want more people to go and say, hey, something's wrong, something's doesn't feel right about this. The way we're implementing this, the way this is talking to us, the way that it's going and hyping me up for whatever, calling me the second coming of Jesus Christ or whatever ChatGPT did, or calling itself Mecha Hitler. Like,
well, yeah,
there are concerns there, and you should be able to just say, hey, I'm concerned. Like, that doesn't mean that you're not necessarily an AI enthusiast, or that you're not, like, passionate about it. It means that you're able to recognize that there's a problem. Like, yeah. I don't understand where we got to the point where now nobody feels comfortable saying that there are issues, and that we, sure. Because that's the first part of identifying a problem, or like solving a problem, is identifying the problem, to me.
Yeah. Okay. No, yeah, I totally agree. Taking a step back, because I want to make sure we touch on this aspect of your work as well. The community building with Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group, just understanding a bit more about what that is first, and then we'll get into the other stuff. But yeah, what is Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group?
So Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group started as a sort of small get together. Dan Murray was the guy at the lead of it all. He had previously done a similar meetup back when like the internet was starting to get big. It was like some sort of .com like interest group or something like that.
Another parallel, I see.
Yes. And for sure, this time around, he was like, okay, well, this feels very similar. I'm going to start meeting and like bringing people together to talk about this stuff. To my understanding, over time, people started getting really excited about that, and that started to create the concept of subgroups in that organization, where the subgroup is either focused on a specific industry, or they're located within a certain geographical area outside of Boulder. So since then, we have ballooned to, I think, at this point, 11 subgroups, 9 focused on industries, 2, including my own, that are focused in certain areas. We have one group
industries being like healthcare, law, that kind of thing?
Yes, okay. Exactly. So we have AI in product, AI in legal, AI in startups and entrepreneurs, and we'll engineering.
List all, the other ones will be in the show notes or whatever.
We even have specifically for demographics wise, we have women in AI as well, where they're tackling that from that perspective, from that lived experience, which, you know, it just goes to show that there's so many different perspectives that you can talk about in the context of AI. And since then, now I can say this pretty confidently, thankfully, we are transitioning towards being a nonprofit, a 501c3.
Nice. That's like pretty big. That takes a good amount of work to get through.
Yes. Yes, it does.
So just real quick on that, like, what does that mean? Or do you know, like, how does that change things, or, you know, that sort of thing?
I would hope that at least for the individuals that are going to our meetups, it doesn't really change much at all.
Right.
Because one of the big things that I feel like is consistent across all of our like leaders in RMAIIG is Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group, interchangeable at this point. It really boils down to the willingness to explore AI without necessarily having any sort of like funnel or business mechanism attached to it. Like I feel like a lot of tech groups, and especially in AI, it tends to feel like there's some sort of business funnel type deal attached to it, where as soon as you walk in the door, you're being assessed on what is the value that you can bring to this group.
Or me, for some people. Like by me, I mean whoever the assessor is, not me specifically.
Yes. How can I help Jacob actually like make money off of this person that just walked in?
I think actually everyone should be thinking that more.
It just ends up feeling like it's very shallow, like those types of experiences, you know, like not you specifically. Like we can keep making Jacob money.
I'm kidding.
But like, you know, when you feel like you're a part of that kind of like funnel, like immediately you can tell, because it's like, well, you know, like until you prove your value in some way, all of a sudden, you know, you're not really being like, the organizers don't really want to talk to you. They're talking to the people that they want like to potentially collaborate with, or whatever the case may be. You know, there's only certain people in the conversation that are talking. Everybody else is the audience for this kind of clique. And it just creates this environment where it just doesn't feel inclusive.
On the other side, you have then RMAIIG, and so you're saying, like, at least for you in how you've experienced it, the key differentiator there is that there isn't this end goal of like obtain external value from this. It's just like, let's come together and talk about how AI is impacting us.
Right. And that is the exact kind of feeling for me. Rocky Mountain AI was the first group where I felt like, in the context of AI, that I was not being looked at as like a number or a value. I was being looked at as a person in the conversation. And ultimately, regardless of whatever meetup I went to, it felt the same. Regardless, like I would go to one for AI and marketing, same deal. And I would go to one in Denver, same deal. And, you know, thankfully, I feel like I've started to create that environment and make that similar here in Fort Collins, where, you know, you get to learn about this stuff without having this feeling of like, I need to bring some sort of value. I need to know what I'm talking about before I come and learn about it. I don't like to approach any of this that way. And I don't think that's true of anybody in the RMAIIG ecosystem. So really for us, the transition to nonprofit, at least from my perspective, is an extension of that methodology, where instead of being like, well, what value can we extract from the community about AI? Quite the opposite. What can we help the community build with AI? Like, do they need, like, you have people who are concerned about how the workforce is going to be affected by this technology, and they want to learn more about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have people who are industry experts wanting to learn about that as well. And it just, it ends up creating an environment that is, to me, very inclusive.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just because I think it's super interesting, the AI's impact on jobs and you know, where that's going. I think that's, you know, has been an increasing part of the discussion in recent months, and I think will continue. The one thing that I would say, I would be remiss if I did not say it, is watch out for the sources of information, because if it's a foundation model company or frontier model, whatever you want to call them, so like Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, etc., Meta, they are incentivized to share certain information.
Oh yeah. And like, that's kind of baked into what we're trying to do as well, because we're not working with individual, like, we're not going and getting a sponsorship from OpenAI or Anthropic or anything like that. Our corporate sponsorships that have so far been, thankfully, like, you know, coming through have been local companies here in Fort Collins or in, Northern Colorado in general. So it's been really helpful to work with people who are actually here as opposed to like, going and getting a sponsorship from Google, which, Google can probably throw as much money as they can. But, how does that improve our community and support the people in Colorado, like trying to navigate this technology? It makes more sense to work with a company that's trying to navigate that here.
Yeah. So a lot of what you talk about as well, and we talked about previously, is like inclusive tech education. And so I think of RMAIIG as an example of that. But more, I guess, concretely or directly, like what does that look like in practice?
I can speak on my own experiences for that, for sure. With that, like going back to the AI and the creative arts event, I really strive to bring as many different perspectives as possible. I didn't make a restriction on medium. I didn't make a restriction on, you need to be an established artist and we need to check your portfolio before you're able to contribute. We just said, contribute. Like, if you want to, like, AI generated or not, tell us how you feel about it. And you could tell from the room and basically the speakers that I had chosen that there were more artists, more creatives in the room. Like, they were more curious about the nitty gritty of utilizing tools like Midjourney than like, somebody who's just like, well, AI art's a thing, I guess. Like, people who are deeply caring about the creative industries. In Fort Collins, I find that the funniest thing, most of the people that go to my meetups are about like twice my age, which is not an issue. But I find it's really interesting because then it creates this perception where I think a lot of people go and think that somebody over 40, somebody over 50, somebody over 60 cannot learn anything new, and that their job search basically might as well be over because, nobody wants to hire somebody who's already old. Old in quotation marks. But in all reality, we have such interesting and like kind of odd engaging conversation because these people have so much experience in their own industries and now they're learning about AI. And they want to talk about this. And they're like, well, like I was around when the .com thing happened. The .com bubble burst.
The .com bubble? What's that?
And for me, I'm just like, okay, I was probably like, I don't even know how old, like, when that happened. So, like, at the very least, I don't have any recollection of it. So hearing those experiences really starts to ground you in the perspective of, like, things may not be necessarily as bad as you might think, but there's also concerns. There's nobody that's saying that it's not a concern. Well, nobody on that's like, we can get into the thought of like corporations going and saying that, or people who benefit from said corporations, but it just creates an interesting environment where like I am interacting with people that otherwise maybe like kind of are starting to get written off in the job search, in the job, in like careers, and that's not the case. They're not like unintelligent. They're not like, senile. Like, they're fully people.
I'm sure that any listeners we have that are over 40 will appreciate you saying that they aren't senile. But based on what you see in practice like this, how is current AI education failing? What are the ways, and like, why do you think that's the case?
So I think it depends on what you mean by AI education. So like,
you tell me.
When with AI education, I feel like trying to learn about AI is very much focused in the roots of business and engineering, like practice. What can I do in order to improve my processes, streamline my business? What can I do to save money, save time, get my engineering team to do more things? for someone who is either not a business person or who is not an engineer or a software engineer at the very least, it ends up creating this kind of thing where it's like, well, if I don't understand what these terms mean, it kind of feels really weird. So for me, I find that that's the biggest problem, where we're not creating enough supportive environments actually support all different kinds of perspective in the conversation, because there's kind of this gut assumption that like everybody should know what I mean when I talk about RAG or when I talk about MCP or whatever the case may be. And it's just like, not everybody knows that. And not everybody needs to know that to be involved in the AI conversation. Like, if you're trying to build an AI application, maybe you should know what those things mean. But if you're trying to talk about how it affects your industry,
you personally.
Or you, exactly. You don't need to have this like deep understanding. You don't need to go and take like a year's worth of courses from deep learning AI or whatever the case may be. Go and get a certification from NVIDIA to talk about AI. I think if anything, going and having those conversations with people who may not understand certain aspects of it, it's actually build that collective understanding a lot better.
Yeah. I guess for me, when I'm thinking about the like AI education, I feel like all of it, essentially, not all of it, but a vast majority of it is through the organizations that are making these systems and profiting off of these systems. And like we were discussing earlier with like the dark patterns thing, you know, when the industry that is profiting off of you using the system is the primary source of information about that system, that's concerning. And I think that just being very cognizant of the sources that you're using and the way that you are understanding these systems, the way you're building up your own knowledge base, is really important. And it's hard because a vast majority of it is sort of this content put out by these big companies or other, boosters. And so that's the thing I think like that I would highlight, but I totally agree with what you're saying as well.
Yeah. To your point, there was an example of an event that I went to recently where it was like CEOs talking about how, AI and entrepreneurship, and one of them fully had the audacity to say nothing bad has ever happened with AI ever during the Q&A session. And I was like,
I have an incident database that says otherwise.
Yeah, I actually did an article about the AI incident database on Red Mage, and I was just around that point where I got motivated to write that article because I was like, no, not quite. And luckily there were people in the audience that were like, well, like with RMAIIG, like there's sometimes people who are very deeply involved with how like Colorado is like navigating AI. So like people on like the task force for like the bill that they were trying to get into practice where, they were like, well,
they did get that
not
through,
exactly.
Right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. So just to clarify, Colorado Governor Jared Polis signed Colorado Senate Bill 24205, also known as the Colorado AI Act, or CAIA, on May 17th of 2024. And as of recording this aside, it's set to take effect on February 1st of 2026. However, there are reasons to be skeptical that this bill will go into effect as is. We'll get into that in just a second, but first let's understand what the bill actually does in its current state. The bill imposes a general duty of care for both developers and deployers to protect consumers from algorithmic discrimination, which importantly extends to any foreseeable risks from intended or contracted uses of AI products. In the case that an AI system will be making consequential decisions about humans, developers and deployers are required to provide certain documentation, including product descriptions and impact assessments. In addition, it makes explicit the right to an explanation, the right to correct incorrect information, and the right to appeal a machine-based decision to a human. It also requires that companies disclose when a user is interacting with an AI system and provides some defenses for companies that find and remedy any issue without involvement from the state. One thing I found particularly interesting about this bill and the people talking about it is that they explicitly say the bill will not address generative AI systems such as ChatGPT, but is instead targeted at other forms of AI. Now, although I think this is a great move on their part, I do want to call out smoke and mirrors when I see it. While the CAIA doesn't make any stipulations about the textual outputs of language models, it does still cover systems which leverage language models to make decisions. In effect, this makes the claim we aren't touching generative AI true, while still regulating the ways in which AI systems, including generative language models, could be used to reduce oversight. As I said earlier, though, things aren't yet set in stone, even though they've been signed into law. This week, before recording these asides, Donald Trump's White House released America's AI Action Plan, which promises to cut red tape for AI developers, essentially giving big tech a license to do whatever the hell they want. In it, the White House stated that it will, quote, not allow AI-related federal funding to be directed towards states with burdensome AI regulations that waste these funds, end quote. Of course, this is just another quid pro quo move from Trump's regime, administration. So much for states' rights, I guess. Anyways, it is still possible that a special session of Colorado Congress will be called, which could include discussions of modifying the already signed CAIA Act. I guess we'll see how things shake out.
That realm of politics in the context of AI is not necessarily my forte. I just see a lot of people going and talking both like, hey, this is great, we should go and perfect shouldn't be the enemy of good, and simultaneously you have people who are very much upset and considering leaving the state because of these regulations that are coming through. I try to stay impartial in that capacity.
I try not to. I have very strong feelings about that, and I think Colorado is actually essentially the only state. Actually, Utah has something that's kind of interesting as well. But other than Utah, is essentially the only state that is actually doing innovative things with regards to AI governance. So within the states, United States specifically. So yeah. But maybe I'll have someone on to talk about that in the future.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear more about it. Like the part that gets me is just like all the noise associated with both like people who are really excited about not being regulated and people who are really excited about absolutely as much regulation as possible. I feel like at least in the context of like an AI meetup, there's a lot of thoughts coming through. And for me, I'm just like, well, I haven't really
the place to have that debate.
Exactly. And kind of creating a space where people can have those like differing perspectives on that, I think is really important, because it's in the realm for me of things that's like, hey, you can have an opinion on that. Like for me, we can disagree on whether or not like this bill or whatever makes sense. Like that's fine. Like
I disagree.
But at least for me, I'm just like, I think there's bigger fish to fry in terms of having that type of conversation and creating that space for people to navigate AI. I find that like, let's start at the basics. Let's make sure everybody has a base understanding, and then people can make those determinations themselves, as opposed to me talking to someone at them about how they should feel about this bill. I've never been the type to go and be like, you should only listen to me. Please listen to me.
So last question on sort of the tech community side. And I think it's very tied to what you just said. How does someone build their own inclusive tech community or get involved in one? For some people, that may be easier than others, depending on your exact like location geographically, or people who you have connections with. But how would you go about doing this? Earlier, you mentioned just like build, and one of those things that you can build is community. So what does someone do to do this?
First, I would say get an index of what is going on in your neck of the woods. If you are trying to do an in-person meetup, I would say go and check somewhere like meetup.com, see what's going on there. Not for the purposes of going and discouraging you if there's already an AI meetup or, Salesforce meetup or whatever the case may be, but just to get your ideas of potentially where, if organizing this whole thing and making this happen is not really in the cards for you, you can actually go and be like, well, there's a group that's already operating. What can I do to help them? Because I think there's all kinds involved. Like, not everybody needs to organize their own meetup. And if you want to,
right,
and you can. I would say also, like, don't be afraid to make mistakes and to start small and be consistent about when you are meeting and what you are meeting on and things of that nature. For me, I started literally at like a bar in Fort Collins. It was loud as hell. Nobody could understand each other. And there was like 5 people there. And over time, I started going and be like, well, we might be able to meet at the library. We might be able to meet here. Eventually, over time, people started getting excited about it. And they were like, hey, maybe you should talk to the Visit Fort Collins Center. And then, we had a couple events there. So, like, the one thing that has been consistent throughout that is that consistency that we've been meeting monthly as much as possible. Like, regardless of whether or not the meetup is actually about, like, having speakers and all these things, just having a meetup and being consistent about it, I think, is one thing that is huge and will start to build that community. And, you bring the energy. I think for me, I bring the energy that I want to see in other people in my meetups. An example, a recent meetup that we had, there was a guy there that was very much not the most kind person. He was very much like, as soon as our speaker that got up, who was a woman, and started talking about bias in the context of AI, she has a lot of experience with working with ageism in the Colorado Commission of Aging. Immediately, the guy would just decided to start interrupting and going and saying that these biases don't exist and all this stuff, and derailing the entire meeting. Cool. This happened 3 more times throughout the evening, but the difference is, like, how do you tolerate that, or do you tolerate? Like, and for the most part, I was very thankful that, like, I spoke up the first time and I was like, hey, we need to move forward because we only have this meetup, like, this time, this room for a certain amount of time. And over time, after the second or third one, I didn't have to get involved. Like, I started going and saying something, and equally 2 other people turned around and were just like, hey, can you, like, let us do our thing? Like, we're trying to get through this meeting. Because it's like, usually our structure is like, we have 2 speakers and then we have a Q&A after. But if we don't get to the Q&A, then nobody gets their questions. Like, we only have the room for so long. And it's like, whether we're at the Visit Fort Collins Center or the library or whatever the case may be, the people who are organizing the room and giving us the room also need to go to bed and also need to go home and make sure that things are locked up. So, like, that's just one example of, like, what kind of environment are you trying to create in your meetup, and how are you being consistent about that is equally as important as the consistency of meeting. And I think with inclusion, it's not necessarily going and being, like, overtly like, oh my God, we include all these different identities and stuff like that. You don't need to go and turn your logo into a rainbow or anything like that. Really, it's just, how do people feel when they go to your meetup? And how do you want to feel if you were someone going to that room? Do you want to feel included? Do you want to feel like you know the person who's up there talking to you? Or do you want to feel like you're a part of a funnel and that someone's sizing you up for your value and that you're not allowed to speak unless you've been here 3 or 4 times, right? Like, all those things, it's like, you put that energy forward first, and over time people will understand that and they will start to bring that energy with them.
Gotcha.
At least from my experience, that's been really helpful.
Cool. And then, as a last thing before my last two questions, which I like to ask everyone, um, for someone who's thinking about starting to freelance in AI, consulting or other work like that, like essentially what you're doing with Red Mage, what are the first 3 steps that you would take?
So firstly, build meaningful projects, start to practice doing what you want to do. Thankfully, one of the exciting things about tech is that if you want to go and build some sort of automation workflow or some sort of website, you can just do that. You don't need to have someone reaching out to you in order to do that. If you want to learn how to use Bolt.new in order to make a video game or something, like some sort of web-based game, you can just do that. And that's an amazing start. Like, if you want to start working on full stack applications with AI involved, find something that you're passionate about and build. Similarly, when you're focusing on something you're passionate about, I really think that helps to bridge the gap between like you turning this into sort of like a personal project versus something that actually people are motivated to support you with. Because I think when people are working on something that they're passionate about, they talk about that thing in a very different way. Like, you may not even notice it when you're talking, but like when there's something you're deeply passionate about, you get excited and people notice that. They see that energy and they see how excited you are about it. For me, I find that with the building meaningful projects and skills, focusing on what I was passionate about really helped me go and bridge that gap, where now I am talking about it and I am very passionate about this thing that I worked on, and people get that same energy. And they're like, wow, this is really cool. Yeah, tell me more about Concordia. Tell me more about this application you made in a weekend. Yes, I would love to hear this, right? And then ultimately, like, from my perspective, I found that the best thing that I could do was supporting and engaging with my own community. To kind of round that out into that third step, where chances are, at least in the context of tech, people don't necessarily have the budget to hire a full engineer or whatever the case may be, but they may be interested in having you help them out for a small project or something. Not necessarily go to every person in your contact list and just say, hey, do you need an AI project? But chances are, as you start getting engaged with people, like networking, community groups, things like that, you start to get to talking about what you do, why you do it, why it matters. And all of a sudden, you meet somebody that's like, hey, I really need a website. I really need somebody to help me understand how to make a custom GPT. I really need somebody to help me connect my custom GPT to my website, and then you can start talking about that. And like, and especially when you've already built those types of skills, you can start to bring them out and be like, look, I built something similar. Like, you want to build a journaling app with AI? Like, I actually built something very similar here with, Claude, and it goes and checks sentiment analysis or whatever. Like, you can start having those much more meaningful conversations when you take it from that 3-step approach. So to summarize, basically, build something meaningful, something that's meaningful to you specifically, like with whatever, like it can be AI, it can be websites, whatever the case may be. With that, focus on what you're passionate about. Like if you're passionate about how, like, going back to the journaling example, if you're very passionate about people being able to reflect on themselves with shadow work or journaling or mindfulness or whatever, lean into that, because that passion is going to show. And then support and engage with your community. And for me, that has helped me a lot with finding work. And people recognizing me as someone that they can like, hey, I actually have a great idea, even if maybe I don't get any work from them immediately. I've had people reach out to me after several months and be like, hey, I actually know somebody that's really interested in working with you. So it may not work out immediately. And even for me, there are a lot of times where I feel like there is moments where I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how this is going to happen, but I'm still going to make it happen. Like it's not to say that there's not going to be any issues and bumps in the road. But I found that was the way that I started, and that's the way that I would recommend, like, really getting into AI, regardless of whether you're freelancing or not. That would be my recommendation.
Awesome. So, last two questions. The first one being, what is your least favorite part about the work you do? What's something that just, like, really irritates you, gets on your nerves?
I would say the most irritating part is people assuming that there is only one demographic of what is considered an AI enthusiast. I find that a lot of times, if you are not a certain demographic, if you're not a certain age, if you're not a certain, whatever intersectionalities you want to assign, typically it feels like, oh, well, this AI thing is not for me. This tech thing is not for me because I'm not this tech bro aesthetic. I'm not this tech bro that, is trying to, I don't wake up at 5 a.m. and dunk my head in ice.
I don't live in San Francisco and have a polycule, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It just ends up being like that misconception grinds me so much because it's just like, I know so many enthusiasts about AI that are critical about it, that are not of these demographics. They don't live in San Francisco. Maybe they're in a polycule, but like it just ends up being this thing that, like, the more perspectives, the more we try to eliminate that assumption of who is involved with AI and who can talk about AI, the better, I think. Because otherwise it drives me up the wall to no end when people are just like, wait, he doesn't look like somebody that would know anything about AI. And it's like, well,
I don't know what to say.
I don't know what to say to that. Like, or like, the classic, oh, wow, you're so well spoken about AI. And it's like, okay, what made you think that I wouldn't be? Like,
but where are you really from?
Right, exactly. Stuff like that, where it's just like, that grinds my gears a lot.
That makes sense. And then on the flip side, what is your favorite part about what you do? The thing that you find most enjoyable or rewarding about your work?
I love knowing that there are people who get what I grind my gears at. Where they understand fully that, like, there's so much more to the conversation than just what a tech bro in San Francisco wants to tell them. They have such amazing lived experiences and they're willing to share that. For my work, that's what gets me out of bed, is being able to work with those people and understand their lived experiences and kind of like have this mutual understanding. It's something that I didn't really experience when I was kind of like software engineer in like companies, that now that I have the ability to work with the companies that I am able to, it is a game changer for me because people actually appreciate what I'm doing. People are not just going and throwing more work at me as a reward for doing these things. Like, and when you get to see that this person, like going back to the example of the nonprofit that I'm working with in workforce development, being able to see tangibly that they are able to spend more time supporting their clients and doing more good there makes a world of a difference to me. And that is fundamentally the favorite part of my work, that I can see when I can see tangibly and feel tangibly that my work is making a difference.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you so much for joining me. I think this was a great conversation. I'm really glad to have you on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been really fun.
It's always nice to be able to talk to people in your local area about things you care about, and this was definitely true here as well. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Chase Procopia, who helps with all things production for this podcast, as well as Maria Capros, who helped out with some background research for this episode. If you found this interesting, leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to help us reach more listeners. So long, and thanks for all the fish.